Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Allen. I'd like to welcome you to Adventures in Dolls, the United Federation of Doll Clubs YouTube channel. Today, our program is by Rebekah Kaufman. She is the ultimate authority on Steiff. And today we have Steiff Bunnies. If you are new to our channel, welcome. And if you're returning to our channel, we'd like for you to leave any comments you have in the comment section. And please like and subscribe. So you don't miss your next adventure in dolls. And now, let's watch Steiff Bunnies.
Hello, and welcome to this discussion on Steiff's wonderful rabbits. This lecture will cover the period from the turn of last century through about 1955. I hope you enjoy this program, especially if you're listening to it around Easter time or springtime, when it's certainly rabbit season, at least around these parts. My name is Rebekah Kaufman. I'm the president of the Doll Study Club of Boston, and I've been a Steiff collector and enthusiast for my entire life. Let's get started. What you see here on this front page of our presentation is a wonderful print ad from Steiff from about 1913, and you can see their wonderful children dolls playing in a rabbit hutch. And I hope that gets you in the mood for this wonderful conversation. Here's our trip down the rabbit hole today, and we will be taking a deep dive with these wonderful springtime creatures. Basically, I'm going to cover each decade for you and discuss the characteristics of the rabbits of the time, their colors, their sizes, and the way they were constructed. I'm also going to do a little detour to talk about Steiff's Woolen miniature rabbits, which is a wonderful subcategory of Steiff's rabbits, as well as wonderful rabbit novelties that have appeared in the pre-war period. And I'm sure you're going to fall in love with all of these, as I have as well. Let's start off with a little rabbit trivia for you to get everybody thinking of these wonderful happy hoppers. So the several versions appeared in the debut catalog of 1892. So rabbits have always been an important part of the Steiff line, probably because Easter is a really big deal in Germany. The first named rabbit was Aussie, and he was introduced in 1938. Before that, all rabbits were just called rabbits, or the word for rabbit in German. Steiff rabbits are measured without the length of their ears, which can be confusing to some people. So the items are usually a little bigger than you think when you look at the measurements, because you have to add in the dimensions of the ears. And Steiff uses very standard body positions when describing rabbits. So those are begging, which is sitting up with the front paws up, like you'd imagine them watching you eat something from the table. Running, which is in a leaping position. Hopping, which is the same as the running from about 1920s onward. Lying, which is flopping on your belly with your limbs relaxed and outright, and sitting, which is sitting on your butt, back legs bent and front legs straight. So you see this happy little fellow here on the left, he is sitting, and he is wonderful. So Steiff's earliest rabbits. The earliest rabbits that Steiff produced were very, very simple. They were very primitive in design and mostly unjointed, meaning very simple like this, or fully jointed. They went to both extremes in the very beginning, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. They were made from felt, velvet, or mohair, starting in 1903, when mohair became commercially available. Most had black button eyes, sometimes backed in felt. They also had albino eyes or glass pupil eyes, starting around 1908. And here you see on the left some very early Steiff rabbits. More examples of those earliest Steiff rabbits. Here's a velvet rabbit on the left, and he is begging, as our truly describes his position. The felt rabbits that you see in the middle, introduced in 1892, and the velvet pincushion rabbit you see here on the right, adorable, and the pincushion, of course, went on his back and not in his belly. But he's just adorable with the ribbons holding that basket in place. This is called a rabbit assortment. It was introduced in 1904, and that's just a variety of different rabbits that would be available for one purchase price. You see they all had ribbons around their neck that usually said the word Steiff on them in the larger sizes, and little bells. Other simple rabbits from the earliest time period. Here's a mohair running rabbit. You can see him with his little bell and bow, and a felt rabbit introduced in 1892. Again, you can see the designs are rather simple, rather elegant, sort of primitive, and very endearing indeed. Items on wheels, a very big deal for Steiff. These pull toys, the metal wheels, of course. There's a felt rabbit on metal wheels and a velvet rabbit, also in a similar design on these metal wheels. The earliest fully jointed rabbit, so the rabbits that we've just looked at were unjointed. Then Steiff sort of went to the opposite extreme and made the rabbits fully jointed, at least some of them. And these were the Dutch rabbits. And the Dutch rabbits had the arms were jointed, the legs were jointed, the heads were jointed, and the ears also were jointed, meaning that you could take the ears and twist them 360 degrees, which is a great, fun, playful feature, and very reflective of Steiff's very early rabbit production. Here's a rabbit here, my albino Dutch rabbit on the left here, having an iced strawberry tea, having a great time. It's also very interesting to note that the F.A.O. Schwartz family had these early fully jointed Dutch rabbits in their collection. And here you can see the children of the F.A.O. Schwartz family of the famous toy store with their Dutch rabbits and posing. Adorable picture. They also are posing with a squirrel and what looks like a little doll. I believe that squirrel is also fully jointed. More rabbits of that early phase, a fully jointed Dutch rabbit in black, and you can see him here on the left. It's interesting, he was introduced in 1912, which was the same year as the Titanic disaster and the same year that the company put out their famous black Titanic mourning bears. So this could be a Titanic mourning rabbit, if you thought about it enough. And here you see also on the right, a mohair rabbit introduced in 1908. He's got wonderful coloring and these floppy velvet feet. So adorable, really quite precious and very early. Let's take a look at rabbits from the 1912 catalog. Here you can see some lying rabbits and some begging rabbits. If you look on the bottom row of the rabbits, smack dab in the middle, that's Peter Rabbit in his little jacket with slippers. But he's never noted as Peter. He's simply noted as a velvet rabbit dressed up in a felt coat and slippers. Totally adorable. And this is from the American catalog in 1912. And another view of that 1912 American catalog of rabbits, those rabbits on wheels. You see metal wheels, and you also see wooden wheels. And the wheels, the wooden wheels did come out around 1912. And many of the rabbits were placed on what's called eccentric wooden wheels, meaning that the axles were sort of a little offline. So when the rabbit was pulled, it looked like he was shimmying and wiggling along. Very realistic and a lot of fun. And you'll see that often with early Steiff rabbits. Now let's jump to the 19-teens to the early 1920s. How have those designs changed? Well, what you're going to see is, for the most part, the designs are going from sort of simple and linear to more sophisticated, more gentle. You'll see more curves and more lines and more softness. Mostly were unjointed and most made from mohair. And most had glass pupil eyes, sometimes backed and felt, or albino eyes. And here's an example of rabbits from 1914 with that sort of softish look with the albino eyes. And you can see it's getting softer and gentler and a little bit more toddler-esque looking as time goes on. More rabbits from the 19-teens, the early 1920s. You're going to see them becoming a little bit sweeter, a little bit more childlike in their proportions and their looks. And you're also going to see here on the right, the mohair rabbits, that wonderful patched style mohair. You're going to see that very prominent in the late 19-teens through 1920s. It's a wonderful construction where the coloring is not sprayed on, it's actually patched in and quite beautiful. Here is a Dutch rabbit on eccentric wheels. He is absolutely beautiful, again, with that lovely patched mohair. And he appeared in the line through quite some time through the teens and through the early 20s. But again, a very darling and endearing piece. Here's a print advertisement from the 19 teens. You're going to see those wonderful running rabbits. So the 19 teens to the 1920s, what happened in that period? There was also a period of economic downturn and industry and material shortage, resulting in what you see here on the left in 1919, a wood plush rabbit introduced in 1919. And that is the word wood. That's not a typo. It doesn't mean to say wool. This was made out of paper or wooden plush. Steiff decided that they couldn't not produce animals in plush. Plush just was not available, the soft, typical plush of the era, because of worldwide shortages and wartime allocation. So they made their items, invented a plush made out of wood, and created a line of items in the wood. And here's a mixed plush rabbit introduced in 1918. Again, mohair wasn't completely available yet, so they made do with the materials that were available. And this was made out of a hybrid of different types of wool and material to give it a soft texture and touch. Catalog pages from 1924, you can see those wonderful running rabbits and other rabbits that I had showed you in the previous pages. Also on the left, a line of wooden rabbit toys. And again, Steiff did a line of wooden toys, including a lot of rabbits, right after World War I, because wood was readily available, much more so than plush. So they integrated wooden toys very heavily into the line at that time. So now let's talk about rabbits from the mid-1920s to the early 1930s. And this is probably my favorite time for Steiff's product design development, because things were just very fun, very adorable, very endearing, and often really colorful. What you're going to see are rabbits that are very feminine. They generally are fluffy, have large faces and eyes and big ears, and very just very endearing. Again, more rounded, more adorable. You're going to see long mohair often in bright colors, and you're also going to see velvet in bright colors. You're going to see a distinctive two-color or outline nose and oversized eyes. And so that's one of the ways to date rabbits, is to look at their nose stitching. You can see the rabbit on the left has a solid nose with pink. Later rabbits have a nose that's more of just an X or an outline. And the rabbits from this era, from the 20s, often have oversized eyes. And that's, again, to add to their childlike appeal. You're going to see lots of detailing, ribbons, bows, sometimes collars and such, and great influx of novelties. So you're going to see rabbit things that weren't made from rabbits in the past, things like puppets, pajama bags, purses and such, very adorable, endearing accessories. Here are some jelly bean rabbits, which I call these jelly bean because they are in these wonderful, fun, surreal colors. You're seeing orange, you're seeing blue. These came in purple and such. And they, of course, are begging. And you can see that these particular ones have a button in each ear, meaning that they're the sample or muster examples from the company, meaning that these were the prototypes or the ones that the seamstresses would put on their desks as they were sewing the items. So they would try to make the items that they were sewing as close to these as possible. So these were really considered the gold standards. It's a really rare, really interesting photograph. Here you're going to see the sitting versions of the jelly bean rabbits. On the left, there's a beautiful pink one, a tipped one, and an orange one. This lovely alpaca rabbit here on the right was introduced in 1929. And this is a great example of what I mean by the nose. Look, it's pink stitched inside with an outline to it. Very, very typical to the 20s. Other great fun and playful designs. This mohair rabbit on the left is in what's called tipped mohair. And the tipped mohair, which is basically like if you had a mohawk hairdo and you dyed it blonde, and 2 weeks later, the tips were still blonde and there was just a little bit of the original color of your hair coming out. That's what tipping is. And so just the tips are colored. Tipped mohair really made its debut in the mid-1920s. So that's what you're seeing here, a wonderful design using the tip mohair. This is a couch animal here on the right, and he's literally designed to put on the back of your couch. He's sitting on a felt pad with trim, and he would just decorate your couch. It's a fun decorative item. This is a little guy from my collection who I just love. He's kind of in rough shape. I purchased him at the UFDC sales room a few years ago at National, but I just love him. He was introduced in 1929, and he's in these fabulous overalls. They're all original. This guy would have been covered in mohair at one point in his life, but he made clearly a delicious meal for a moth at one point many years ago. But darling nonetheless, and a beautiful, sort of fun, adorable child-esque design from the period. Here is somewhat of a mystery item. I received this teeny tiny rabbit. Would fit, 2 of them would fit in your palm. They're so tiny. And I didn't know where they were from, and I've never seen them before, but it turns out they are from what's called a roly-droly, which is a novelty that was designed in the late 1920s, and he would sit on a wooden surface and he would spin around when he was pulled. And this is exactly what he would look like. And you can see him here on the right. That's what the roly-droly looks like with the 2 little rabbits. But this is the advertisement or the marketing picture of roly-drolys from the 1929. And you can see the little rabbit sitting with the chick in the lower right picture of the color picture. So here's a print advertisement from 1927, and clearly you can see Steiff wanted folks to look at these brightly colored fun items with orange really popping out. Lots of orange rabbits in this great, wonderful original print advertisement from 1927. And here's a catalog page from 1929. Also that wonderful color and happy period in Steiff. The full color picture has those wonderful jelly bean rabbits and some rabbits on wheels and a dress rabbit and such, but all happy, delightful, fun, completely Easter-esque designs for the rabbit collecting and Steiff collecting community. Now let's fast forward to the mid-1930s to 1943, pre-war period. And what you're going to see is a dramatic change from what I just showed you. So in the mid-1930s through 1943, what you're going to see is a real change in the look and feel of Steiff's items, as well as the construction and manufacture. Very few new patterns are launched, and lots of form and variation you'll see in the line. And that means that things might be produced in smaller sizes, things might be produced in different materials, but there's no enormous new innovation in the rabbit line. The traditional patterns are lean and pensive. You're going to go from big-eyed, happy, brightly colored rabbits to very proportional, very austere-looking rabbits. It's very clear when I show you the difference in the pictures coming up. You're going to see a greater use of substitute fabrics. So instead of these long, beautiful tipped mohair, you're going to see wool plush with airbrushing on it instead of patchwork colors or other sort of happy features to the items. You're going to see simple embroidered facial features and proportional eyes. Take a look at that. General production austerity, less playful, less colorful. And a big thing that happened in the 1930s is the introduction of woolen miniatures, and we'll take a deep dive into those and why they became so popular and were the perfect product at the perfect time for Steiff. So here are some mid-1930s to 1943 rabbits. And what you're going to see again is you look at the very simple nose. It's basically just an X instead of fully colored in. The eyes are proportional, and everybody looks, not nearly as happy. I always think that items from this period look a little bit glum. The mohair rabbit introduced in 1935, that he's albino and he's simply head jointed. The mohair rabbit in the middle, introduced in 1933. Again, a much simpler design. It's not nearly as toddler-esque or endearing as the previous decade, but it is what it is and reflects what's happening at Steiff at the time. And then you see here in 1938, Steiff introduced this rabbit in artificial silk plush, which is the material, a wartime era material that was used in substitute for other fine woolen plush. It tends to look really great for just a little bit, and then it gets pretty ratty and unshiny very quickly. So it has a limited shelf life, and it's very unusual to find artificial silk plush items from the 30s, 40s, or 50s that still have their shine and luster, because it just tends to go away with natural play. More rabbits from the mid-1930s through 43. This art silk rabbit here on the left, again, he's got a little wear to him. You see it kind of mats down a bit, his simple nose and mouth. This mohair rabbit introduced in 1934, he's begging. Again, you can see he's got some long mohair detailing around his sideburns and areas and stuff, but still much simpler and much less feminine and precious than the previous generation. And these mohair rabbits here on the right, introduced in 1934. Again, a wonderful design. I can't have enough of them in my collection, but they really reflect the austerity of the time and reflect the sort of the mood and culture of the company and the country at the time. More rabbits from 1930s. These guys are begging. Giant mohair rabbit introduced in 1937. And his arms would be jointed and his head would be jointed. And this artificial silk plush rabbit introduced in 1938, again, begging, and it's just a lovely and beautiful design. Here are some catalog pages from 1938, so you can get an idea of the rabbits that were available and such. There's fewer in the line, and the choices are simpler. I think that has to do with supply chain issues as well as distribution. There was less opportunities for Steiff to distribute their products during this time because of geopolitical concerns and such. Here's a print advertisement from 1938. And what's interesting about this is these are all of what Steiff is selling a lot of and what they're trying to be known for. Pandas were introduced in the Steiff line in 1938. So clearly they're trying to put a spotlight on those pandas. But you also see a dressed rabbit. And we'll talk a little bit more about Steiff's dressed rabbit line later in the program. But that was also a big deal in the mid to late 30s. And here are the artificial silk plush rabbits right in the front. So this is what Steiff was interested in people thinking about and buying at the time, and these were relatively available in the line at the time. So let's take a little detour on our tour of rabbits history today and talk about woolen miniature rabbits. So why did Steiff create woolen miniatures and a woolen miniature rabbit line? So in the mid to early 1930s, Steiff's product development went in two directions. It went on a really high-end route, and that was producing very expensive, very exclusive items for the very few people who still had money left at the time who wanted high-end sort of designer elite products. Steiff also created a line of very low-end products, and I don't mean cheap or uninteresting, but just were created with great efficiencies, and they were produced with items and materials that were readily available at the time. And one of the things that they did on that lower end production strategy is to create a series of woolen miniatures. And these were basically pom-poms, when like you think of what's on the top of your hat at winter. They're basically yarn that has been formed into these wonderful shapes. And Steiff created an enormous line of these, did a lot with birds, a lot with rabbits, did a lot with other little things like bugs and such that really translated well into the pom-pom form. But one of the greatest things that Steiff did with the woolen miniature line were these woolen miniature rabbits. And despite the fact that these were produced as a low-end product at a bad time in Germany, today, these rabbits that you're seeing here on the screen would make people at auction go crazy because they're so desirable and they're so rare and they are so adorable. And these items are really only at the most, maybe 3 to 5 inches tall, these big ones, but the smaller ones could be an inch or so, really precious. But you see here, these woolen miniature rabbits, the rabbits on skis, using Steiff's ability to produce wooden accessories and integrate those into the woolen miniature rabbits. His body is sort of a giant pom-pom shaped with mohair ears. What you're seeing here in the middle is called a congratulator. And a congratulator was a woolen miniature or a very small item on a disc that had a piece of sort of paper on the front, and you could write whatever you want on it. For instance, happy birthday, happy anniversary, congratulations on your divorce, whatever you wanted to put. It was just a way, it was like a 3D greeting card. So this is a rabbit congratulator in the middle. He's got a basket on his back. Looks like he's taking a walk with his walking stick. And here's a rabbit couple congratulator introduced in 1939 on the way right. And again, sort of pom-pom animals. They've got, she's wearing a dress. His pants are integral to him. I believe they're also made of yarn fabric, the woolen yarns. They're both wearing felt slippers, and they have felt ears, but simply adorable and very much in demand with collectors today. Here are some other examples of the Steiff's woolen miniature rabbits. These lying rabbits in the upper left were introduced in 1931 in one of the earliest woolen miniatures in the Steiff line, and you can see how well rabbits translate into the pom-pom form. The begging rabbits, introduced in 1936, the couple on the bottom left, totally adorable. Their legs are made out of metal and their feet are made out of metal, but they're wearing little tiny like woolen felt like slippers or clogs, just totally adorable. The begging rabbits in the upper right, introduced in 1934. Their clothing is integral to their bodies, made out of the wool threads. And the hopping rabbit that you see on the bottom, he's just adorable. His body is lined in metal wires and is posable, and he has felt ears, but simply adorable. And again, these guys are anywhere, what you're looking here on the screen is anywhere from 1 inch tall approximately to like no more than like maybe 3 or 4 inches tall, depending, or wide, depending on the piece. But these guys are teeny tiny. They're wonderful. They look wonderful posed in groups together. They look wonderful in the arms of dolls. And they're also wonderful to pose in vignettes, for instance, on your fireplace mantle or the middle of your table for a centerpiece. They're just absolutely delightful and wonderful. And they weren't that expensive either. That was part of the strategy to really emphasize them in the line, is that they were very affordable. This is a really wonderful woolen miniature rabbit, begging, introduced in 1935. His body is this very intricate pom-pom, and his ears are made out of mohair, and you can see his button and the traces of his red ear tag, but simply delightful. And this guy would sell easily at 4 big figures at auction today. Just wonderful, very rare, and very desirable. Another example of this wonderful piece, you can see his pom-pom body, his mohair ears, and his Steiff button. Here's a print advertisement from 1936, which shows part of the range of the woolen miniatures, including the wonderful rabbits. We've been talking about these cartoon-style rabbits with the giant ears and the googly eyes. You can also see some woolen miniature cats, birds, a wonderful chimpanzee, a Saint Bernard, and a duck, and mice, and also rabbits with slippers. Simply adorable. As they like to say, one of each, please. They're just wonderful. And a catalog page from 1938, also showing some of these woolen miniatures, including a lot of the rabbits we've talked about on the bottom. You also can see a little squirrel and a ladybug hanging out with the rabbits on the page on the bottom, but simply adorable and very desirable amongst collectors today. Now let's jump to 1947 through 1955. And a lot can be said about what happened at Steiff actually during the heat of World War II in the late 1930s and early 1940s. And that's a lecture all unto itself, which takes 2 or 3 hours, which I'm happy to share with you or your club, but it's its own entity. So what I'm going to do is skip to the first postwar rabbit from 1945 and 1946. And this guy is really wonderful. This guy is a rabbit head made out of artificial silk plush, and the tops of his hands and the tops of his feet are made of artificial silk plush, and his body is made of stockinette, and it's stuffed with excelsior. And the dress that she is wearing is a very inexpensive dress made out of rayon. And what you see here was only produced for American soldiers to purchase on the American PX bases stores right at the conclusion of World War II. And these are the first, perhaps the first items that Steiff was able to produce, given that they had very constricted supply chain and materials available to them. They were still rebuilding the factory after the destruction of World War II. But Steiff was determined to create beautiful products and get themselves back on the world stage as a premier toy manufacturer as soon as possible. So they created these wonderful silk plush rabbit dolls, along with a silk plush teddy baby, which was similar construction, and I believe a silk plush cat at the time. And these were the first rabbits that appeared in the Steiff line after the conclusion of World War II. But these were so rare that they're not even actually cataloged. You don't really find these in any of Steiff's standard reference books. So what happened from 1947 to 1955? So the factory is slowly reopening and slowly producing more and more beautiful products as materials become available. The traditional patterns produced in pre-war designs and proportions through 1950, but often in substitute fabrics. So for example, what you see here on the left is a rabbit on eccentric wooden wheels that would have appeared pre-war, but it was made post-war in artificial silk plush because mohair was not available at the time. So this is a very typical item that you would see in the late 1940s through early 1955s. There's becomes many named new patterns are introduced as part of a greater global reentry strategy. So starting in the early 1950s, you're going to see a great onslaught of delightful new rabbit patterns because Steiff, again, is trying to sort of reinvent itself to the post-war era, get itself into its former channels, its former sales channels, including FEO Schwartz and across Germany and Europe and the United States, selling at toy stores across the world and really bringing themselves to reflect the optimism of the post-war period. And what you're going to see starting in the early 1950s is the line is overall joyful and optimistic and has a little bit of the 1920s look and feel to it as well. So here are some rabbits that were introduced in this very early post-war period. Sunny Rabbit, who is sitting and head jointed. Hoppy Rabbit, who is hopping, he's jumping, he's wonderful. And the Lilac Rabbit, introduced in 1952, a very successful introduction. This guy has a very goofy face, big ears, and extremely long, thin arms and legs and torso, very playful. And Steiff would go on to create the Lilac template in other animals, including bears and dogs and cats, or with the same long, leggy look and feel, because this Lilac Rabbit was so successful. This Lying Rabbit, who sort of looks at you from the corner of his stink eye, was introduced in 1953. He's very funny. He makes a great Easter basket rabbit. Nicky Rabbit was introduced in 1951, and he's fully jointed. The larger ones have these delightful open mouths, and the smaller one does not have an open mouth, but super sweet, very desirable, and very endearing. And Floppy Rabbit, introduced in 1953, was literally designed to be a sleeping toy for children. And if you look closely at his eyes, they are stitched shut with eyelashes and such. He's sound asleep and hopes to lull your child to sleep as well. Of course, rabbits made the cover of the Steiff catalog post-war because Steiff was very proud of these designs and these introductions. Here you can see Nicky being introduced in the early 1950s, along with other new designs for the post-war period. In 1949, there was very few Steiff rabbits available. Again, production was just slowly rising back to the level it was early pre-war. Here you can see some of the running rabbits and the begging rabbits and the sitting rabbits here on a black and white catalog page. By 1951 and 1952, things were back into color and a little bit more diverse in their offerings. You can see on the lower left the running rabbit, rabbits on wheels, and what's called a record rabbit, which is the rabbit on the four-wheeled cart, like he's pushing and pulling to make that go. Very adorable, all in mohair and such. And in the upper right, you can see a series of sitting and begging rabbits. Really beautiful and resuming Steiff's look and feel and playful quality about presenting its offerings. Now let's take a look at some of my very favorite things, which are novelties. Here are some 14-karat highlights from my collection and other things I've handled for customers. So this is a wonderful set of Skittles, rabbit Skittles, and Skittles are these sort of the analogous to bowling. And what you would do is you would set these up and try to knock them down with the felt, the ball, which was wood covered in felt. The kingpin was on a little higher wooden plinth and always had a jacket and a crown or some other differentiating accessory to him. And what's remarkable about these Skittles, or any Skittles that still exist, is because these were literally designed to be knocked over and sort of trashed by children. So the fact that these still are around and still are presentable and clean and such is remarkable. And Skittles usually are very interesting to collectors, rabbit Skittles particularly. And I sold this collection for a colleague several years ago at James D. Julio. But it was a lovely set and quite beautiful. You can see their buttons and ears, but these were actually produced. These rabbit Skittles were in the line before the buttons were introduced in the ears in the early turn of last century. So sometimes you find these without buttons because they're even earlier than buttons, but really beautiful and quite lovely. These were produced in sets of 9 and sets of 10. Wonderful examples of what's called tail turns head models. And this simply means that the little mohair covered tail at the end of his fanny. You could twist to the left and the right, and the head turns in a circle correspondingly. The metal mechanism is embedded in the torso and the head, and you'll always find these very solidly stuffed with Excelsior to keep that mechanism in place. But here you can see a sitting version and a begging version, and a really beautiful, colorful begging version. These were introduced in the very early 1930s, and the tail moves head models appeared in the line in the 30s, a little bit in the 40s, and just a handful of them in the very early 1950s. But after that, the technology was not really of interest to consumers anymore. But to collectors, they are very adorable and very playful and clearly interactive. Pram and catch toys. So these were items that were designed to toss about. So again, the fact that they still exist today, in some respects, is a miracle, as they were designed for rough handling with children and such. So the hanging toy rabbit, introduced in 1926 on the left, came with an ivory ring and a pom-pom, and you would hang this from your child's baby carriage so they could knock it around and play with it. The ball rabbit, introduced in 1932, literally was in the shape of a ball. The body, the torso was a ball, and he was suspended by this ribbon that you see looks sort of yellow and creamish. It was it lined in elastic, so you would sort of throw it and catch it. It was sort of a game that you would play with yourself. And the ball rabbit came in 2 sizes and also in other forms as well, including things like chicks and cats, and even a little lion was produced in this ball form in the catch toy model. And this hanging toy rabbit, introduced in 1897, a much earlier version of the hanging toy rabbit, also designed as a pram toy. That little felt rabbit with the pom-poms would be held, you would suspend that from the ivory ring on the tip and have your child play with that in their playpen or their carriage. Tumblers and roly-polies. This is a roly rabbit here on the left, introduced in 1937. This is like a weeble. They wobble, but they don't fall down. So the rollies have their mohair bodies integral to their heads, and they roll about. Tumblers are perched on a very heavy wooden semicircle. This really weighs a ton. You don't want to get hit by this. You don't want your kids throwing this around. It really hurts. It's to be smacked by a tumbler. But you can see the rabbit form makes a wonderful rolly or a tumbler. The tumbler that you see in the middle was featured on display at the Margareta Steiff Birth House Museum in Germany a couple years ago. So clearly she loved this item as well. Cozies. So clearly, when you think of egg cozies, you tend to think of farm types of animals, including like chicks and hens would be great egg cozies, but Steiff also made egg cozies in velvet and felt, and these are just adorable, and you would simply slip these over your boiled eggs to keep them warm as you called the family to the table to keep their breakfast warm. But really adorable, and cozies were definitely a pre-war novelty. A few replicas and fun cozies were produced post-war, but this really was a pre-war type of novelty specialty, but totally adorable. And clearly the rabbit form, especially sitting or lying, is perfect as an egg cozy. Dolls and dressed character rabbits. So these are just adorable, and we talked a little bit about these previously, but what Steiff did here, Jack Rabbit, introduced in 1927, was based on a popular book series of the time, and his clothes were integral to him. And you can see his large eyes and stitched nose, very typical to the 1920s, and fully dressed in this wonderful costume that reflects one of the outfits he would be wearing in his Jack Rabbit books. The doll rabbits that you see here on the right were introduced in 1931, and these are really cool. So what Steiff did in 1931 as part of that efficiency strategy that they were trying to create to keep costs down and labor down and use as little materials, expensive materials as possible, is they created a series of rabbit dolls and other dolls. And these basically had this wonderful mohair and felt head of their high-end rabbit, but the bodies of these dolls were a very simple fabric material, unjointed and floppy arms, solid legs with flat feet designed for standing. And the tips of the hands and feet were made from wool plush or mohair plush. So they used very minimal high-end fabrics. They used the high-end fabrics where you could see underneath the clothing and the bodies and the arms and such were this very inexpensive material. And so they were able to produce these dolls, they produce them in 3 different sizes, sort of a small, medium, and large. And they produce the dolls with I think it was maybe 10 or 12 different outfits. So they were able to very easily fill their catalog pages with different choices of rabbit dolls, basically by producing a head, 3 different bodies, and a dozen different outfits. And that produces a great number of different SKUs or stock for them. Again, creating great efficiencies when materials were very hard to come by, and it was very important to keep things as efficient and low cost and cost effective as possible, and also inexpensive for the consumer. More dolls and dressed character rabbits. This is the house papa, or the father rabbit, and you can see he's got his wonderful sideburns, and he's very you can see his simple nose and such. He was introduced in the late 1930s. Now, his outfit is fabulous, but it is not it was not created by Steiff. My sister, who has amazing sewing and knitting talents and also creates shoes, created this outfit for my rabbit. So he came to me naked, but he is now dressed, but he is not dressed originally, but it's quite appropriate. And then here you can see 2 dolls, the boy and the girl, Bob and Madel, from 1949 through 1955. They are in all original outfits, except her purse is not original to Steiff, but I just loved it and it matched her outfit so well, and she wanted to show it off to you. But other than that, her outfit is entirely original. And so these dolls were also produced, these rabbit dolls were also produced for a few years after in the post-war period through about 1955. Here are the rabbit dolls from the 1938 catalog that I was telling you about, those novelties. And here you can see the dress dolls and the different sizes and some of the different outfits that they came in. So sort of a mix and match. You'd have to order through the company the outfit and the size that you wanted. What's very interesting is that the rabbit on the bottom of the page on the far right is wearing a spotted, a polka dot outfit, which is both a dress and a cape, which is just wonderful. And you don't see too many Steiff dolls of any sorts wearing both an outfit and outerwear at the same time, but just beautiful. Here are some other Steiff rabbits, dolls and such. Peter Rabbit, introduced in 1904. And here you can see him in a felt jacket with slippers. And those slippers would have the word Margaretta Steiff branding on one of the bottom of them. There's a Hunter Rabbit doll introduced in 1912. And Steiff very often had animals interpreted as hunter or hunter dolls, because hunting is very popular in Germany and it's part of the culture. And they would usually carry little guns like this, you see, or later on wooden versions, but just beautiful and very, very rare. Both things that you see in this page are very, very rare. Wheeled wonders, of course. So Steiff created a series of items on wheels. This begging rabbit on eccentric wheels was introduced in 1926. So as you pull him along, he bobs up and down. It's super fun to watch these move around. His color is wonderful. And of course, this is a begging jelly bean rabbit from the 20s. Makes a wonderful wheeled toy. This sort of Easter themed wooden item in the middle, a wood pull toy rabbit, introduced in 1922, when Steiff was really emphasizing the wooden toy line, because wood was relatively inexpensive and very available where it was located in southern Germany. And this wonderful record rabbit, introduced in 1926, and by record meaning you pull it along, it goes on the wheels, and it pumps the cart back and forth like it's driving it. It's quite adorable. The arms and legs are very loosely jointed. Other rarities I'll share with you. This teddy rabbit here on the left, I've only handled 1 or 2 of these, one of them at James Julia, and he at one time was blue. He was blue and white, and he's just very sweet. He has sort of a teddy bear body and a rabbit head from about 1928, based on his construction, proportions, nose stitching, and eyes. A pin cushion, you would often see the smallest Steiff items perched on either a velvet or a mohair cushion. Here's a rabbit pin cushion from 1928, a wonderful purple lilac colored jelly bean rabbit on a pin cushion. How adorable is that? And a rabbit hand puppet. This guy was introduced in 1950. So other things to look at. This is called a rabbinette, introduced in 1927. It's a mohair head and mohair hands and feet. His body is made out of velvet, and he's very long and thin. These were produced in 3 sizes, and these were designed to hang from the rear view mirror of your car so they could bop around as you drove. They were sort of a 1927 kind of fun novelty, very sweet and very rare. They were not designed as sturdy and as tough as other Steiff items, given the sort of their the fun nature of them, but to find them today are very rare, and they're very desirable amongst collectors, especially those that have all of their IDs like this one and their original pull and their hanging apparatus as well. This is called a carrot rabbit here on the right. It was introduced in 1950s as an exclusive for Macy's, and he was holding a carrot, and in his back pocket, he actually had a back pocket, which also held a little carrot. These came in a number of sizes, and I believe even a musical version was produced. These are extraordinarily rare in the rabbit line. Here's a print advertisement showing those wonderful hanging long-legged rabbinettes and the other produced in the same design. You can see the Molly or dog designs and also the cat design in that wonderful velvet and mohair combination. You can also see the Cheerio, which is the big blue guy towards the left, a very rare design as well. But again, this rabbit is making headlines with his beautiful purple coloring and lovely expression and face and such. This is the one that got away, or the best of all worlds. Everybody has one that got away at auction. I was hesitant to bid at auction on this. It didn't go very high, and I'm still kicking myself years later. Anyway, this is Puck the gnome driving a rabbit cart. These are wonderful early rabbits on eccentric wheels, which you can see because they are off center. And he pulls us along, and the rabbits bob, and he has his own joyride. Wonderful. This was produced with 2 or 4 rabbits, and is just simply wonderful. So I often think of this when I think, oh, move too slow. I overthunk this one and didn't bid. Anyway, that's what I have for you with the history of Steiff rabbits. I hope you enjoyed this show of what Steiff's production from the turn of last century through 1955 or so. I wish you all a wonderful spring, happy Easter, and I hope this was a cheerful earful for you. I welcome your inquiries related to all things button ear, rabbit or otherwise. I'll do my best to respond to you. Here's my email, and I also have a website, which is sort of an informational hub of all things Steiff. So please check that out if you'd like to learn more. And as always, it takes a village to create anything of interest and color and beauty and substance. And these are my inspirations for this talk, provided pictures, ideas, information, and such. But thank you very much, and bye for now.
Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed Steiff Bunnies by Rebekah Kaufman. We would like to send a special thank you to her. We sincerely appreciate her very kind and generous support. If you're not already a member of the United Federation of Doll Clubs, and you think you might like to become one, but maybe you don't want to belong to a club, I want you to know that we have online clubs and you can be a member at large. Find out about that. Go to membership at ufdc.org and sign up to become a member. It only costs $43 a year, and we really need your support. So be sure when you sign up, you tell them that Karen sent you. Be safe, and we'll see you next time.